Hey, G7.
Progress in gender equality is impossible without women's economic empowerment.
According to the World Economic Forum, it will take 268 years to close the gender gap in economic participation, and this is simply not acceptable.
As you know, the pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on women and girls around the world, especially those who are most marginalised. Women's unpaid and underpaid work has had to fill in the gaps as public services are stretched to their limits, while more women lost their jobs than men, and their return to paid work has been slower.
In the face of global crises, G7 must ensure that women and girls progress in the world of work are equipped with full economic rights and opportunities.
We, as W7 advisor, thus call to the G7 to adopt transformative economic policies that go beyond crisis management to address structural economic barriers to gender equality.
To promote decent work for women both at home and globally, including migrant workers and those working in the informal sector.
G7 countries should provide tailored support for women entrepreneurs and ensure their equal access to finance, to markets, and to procurement opportunities.
We, the W7 advisor, choose call on the G7 to ensure to provide quality education, mentoring, and training systems at all levels for women and girls in all their diversity.
We at the W7 say it's time to strengthen women's leadership in COVID responses. It's time for decisive action to implement feminist economic recovery packages that promote decent work for women in all their diversity, that recognise the value of unpaid care across policymaking, and that invest an additional 2% of a country's GDP in gender transformative health and care services.
Are you ready? It's time to deliver.
Time to deliver.
It is time to deliver.
Some applause for our W7 advisors here, please. Because it sounds so simple, just 2.5 minutes, but actually it's been months of intense work. So really grateful that you spent your energy and your work on this, and having very concrete recommendations will definitely help to convince the G7. And I'm really happy and delighted to have the honor, yes, my name is Juliane Rosin, to facilitate this very first panel. And even though we're waiting for some very important person, I think we just start to set the scene and use this time just the way we want to use it, right? So I want to use the time to speak with you about the gendered consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I assume most of you already heard that, well, women and girls and marginalized people were disadvantagedly or higher affected by the consequences of the pandemic. Just some numbers. So women lost their jobs about twice as much compared to men globally, twice as much. To give you even more concrete understanding what this means, this came together in a total of about $800 billion missing. So women and girls really lost money during the pandemic. And actually, even prior to the pandemic, there was a gender divide on the labor market participation. So what we see is that the pandemic, again, multiplied already existing discriminations and structural inequalities, not just based on gender, but also based on religion, race, ethnicity, displacement status. So I'm very happy to be here, not alone on this panel, but to have very qualified panelists. And I want to introduce them very quickly, at least the ones already here. And then later, of course, we'll include the one who is still missing. So sitting next to me, I have Musna Deld. She is now based in Canada, but you're original from Syria. So you traveled all the way from Canada just to attend our summit. So I'm very thankful for that. You're a W7 advisor. So it was also your work we just listened to. Thank you so much for that. You're a policy analyst and a researcher and an advocate for the diaspora of women's refugees' political participation, and you are a co-founder of the Syrian Women's Political Movement. And also you founded Women Refugees Not Captives, aiming to end forced and child marriages of Syrian women refugees and girls. And I really want to talk about how the pandemic hit women on the ground and women's networks and what's needed to support them, not just for their own sake, but for all our sake. So thank you so much for coming and being here. So, and sitting next to Musna, we have from Ukraine, now based in Berlin, Daria Mustafina. You're an entrepreneur and an activist, I learned. And you're here to speak about your perspectives as a founder and director of the Institute for Partnership and Sustainable Development. And also you're the coordinator of the Academy for Women Entrepreneurs. That is a network of women entrepreneurs who are now using their capacities to, well, use their enterprises for humanitarian aid to support the situation on the ground. But this is not where you started. You actually been a youth activist right from the start, right? So I learned you are one of the young world ambassadors for Ukraine. So we're very happy to have you here, Daria, and go into everything later. But as you can see on the screen, we don't only have wonderful women here in Berlin, we also have someone tuned in from New York. Speaking for France, it's Delphine O. She's ambassador at large. And I think it's very interesting to know that she's the youngest ambassador in the history of France. And even more important for us, she is the Secretary General for United Nations Generation Equality process that took place yesterday. Last year. But obviously, there will be some follow-ups in the future, and we will discuss this later. But I think something we should know right now, this process was co-organized not just by France, but also with Mexico, and facilitated and organized by the UN Women. And yes, we are very looking forward to have you. And I think we just jump into it directly. And as I said later, and we include the missing one. So, Musna, I'd like to start with you. So I already explained that you're intensely engaged when it comes to women's organizations, working with the people on the ground, and just give us some quick understanding. How did the pandemic hit you, the work, and the women you work with? So we have better understanding of concrete examples.
Yeah,
I think it's on.
It's on?
Yes.
Okay. As a intern worker coming in from Syria, so it's like working in this field. It's not easy because you have bomb from the sky and also a pandemic on the ground. So with the country that has 6 million of displaced people, half of them women and children, and they are in limbo for years. It's been a decade for Syria, and the situation of COVID puts women's life under risk, under concrete risk, because what I noticed from the ground, that at the beginning, the funding cuts that happened at the beginning of the COVID has affected services for women, including shelters, health services, and also education and empowerment programs for women. So this is at the beginning. So women ended up without having access for basic services because the whole world, it's just busy to respond to the pandemic. So this is why the funding it's really affected the response of the local civil society and local NGOs on the ground, and also the situation of women. And because of the lockdown, and so many of women have been victims of gender-based violence from. They've been locked in their tents or in their camps, and sometimes in their where they are based, and faced a violence from their partners or their family members. So and without having any difficulties to reach out service providers and also protection providers to help them to find a way to get out of this situation. Further, the shift to online spaces also, you can imagine even in developed countries there's a need for devices and internet and connection. So imagine for displaced women, there is not enough, and sometimes there is no equipment and also infrastructure for displaced women to reach online spaces. And if so still they are not protected because they don't have also tools to protect themselves in virtual space, and also to navigate how to use these tools to reach protection, education, and also empowerment programs. So I think COVID puts women in the global south and in the global north in a very difficult situation that needs to all of us to collaborate to tackle these problems and to address these dilemmas from a collaborative perspective, and to help women to get out of this situation.
Thank you so much. Yes, I understand. So the cutting of funding, so having nothing to support you and your work, and then everything turning into the digital space, but with no access to this in the first place, how to organize.
Exactly.
And I assume especially the second one, Daria, was very important for you and your work. Once the pandemic hit us, you already had this network of women entrepreneurs engaging. And then what did you do? How did it look like in your situation?
Yeah, basically it's right. Thank you very much for raising these important topics. I'm Ukrainian and it's my superpower. And I'm honored to be director of Institute of Partnership and Sustainable Development and to implement the Academy for Women Entrepreneurs. And to be directly on the frames of lockdown and pandemic, we organized online academy for thousands of women entrepreneurs in Ukraine. And they were able basically to organize digital transformation of their businesses, to change supply chains, to start to export their products or to find new clients. And basically now this powerful network of women entrepreneurs become a network of people who saving lives, who help to evacuate people, who help to provide food and necessities to civilians in different cities of Ukraine. Because directly today it's 3 months after the war come in our sovereign country. And on the 24th of February, it was a full invasion of Russian Federation to our sovereign country. And basically now millions of people lost their jobs, houses and livelihood. 6.1 million of refugees was needed to flee from Ukraine. And basically 99% of them are women and children. 6 million of people are internally displaced, and 12 more millions are affected directly by the intervention. And of course, we need to understand that this is during these 3 months, more than 500 schools were destroyed and kindergartens, around 800, hundreds of hospitals, and it's around 32 millions of square meters of housings. It's around half of the millions of families lost their homes. So we understand that it's one of the biggest refugee and basically economic crisis after the Second World War, which are rising and not stopped yet. That's why, of course, the experience which we received during the pandemic and operating with our network of activists and entrepreneurs entrepreneurs now become like very important to save people's lives, because our like amazing women entrepreneurs, like for example, instead of producing swimming suits or underwear and be represented on the Paris exhibitions, they produce now uniform or bulletproof jackets and give it for free for our defenders, or give for free food, bread, or some necessities to civilians, helping people to just to survive. And especially it's very important if we are talking about occupied territories, because right now like part of the network are working on the frames of occupation on Donbass, on Kherson region, on Kharkiv region. It's a farmers who are the only one who produce and like basically to provide some food for local people. And like it's very important to support them, of course, and basically to provide them some funds and also knowledges how to relocate, how to restart their businesses, and basically how to move forward. And in this case, like the work of Academy of Women, it's very important. And of course, if we understand that Ukrainian economy, it's like 99% of Ukrainian economy, it's small and medium enterprises. And only 13% now are working. So it's a big task for us as organization and NGO to restart and relocate the small and medium enterprises, to provide them a knowledge and consulting and mentorship, how to back to business, and basically how to combine volunteering and saving people's lives, providing some products and services to civilians, and also basically to have some cash flow for their businesses, and probably to go to international markets to export their products and basically to save Ukrainian economy.
Thank you so much. I think what both of you clearly stated is that we don't have just one crisis, and we don't have that one type of women. We have intersecting crises that are multiplying themselves. And having your very concrete examples, and you just adding the fact you are already agents of not just change, but you're operating in the system. You're providing help. Women aren't just victims. Yes, your network is intensely important to provide help which is needed on the ground. And I think we have so many stakeholders tuned in, both representing governments, but also private sector and other people and organizations that can support. I hope you listened very carefully, because you hear concrete projects that need support. And speaking about support, dear Ambassador, I'd like to turn to you. So the generation equality process was a victim itself to the COVID-19 pandemic. It actually was planned to take place in 2020, and due to the pandemic, everything had to be postponed just 1 year. And looking at the website, it reads that at the last meeting in Paris, you launched a 5-year action journey to achieve irreversible progress towards gender equality, founded on a series of concrete, ambitious, and transformative actions, including $40 billion in financial commitments. That sounds quite awesome, I have to say. So listening to the real challenges women's groups and women entrepreneurs are facing on the ground, I would like to hear from you. So what's the next step? I mean, having these concrete commitments, how will they really be implemented? And I did some calculations. We just learned we lost in those 2 years of pandemic about $800 billion in income. So $40 billion sounds a lot, but it's actually just 5%. I know you're not responsible for covering it all up, but I think you get my point. So what's coming up next? Sorry, I can't hear her, unfortunately. Just 1 second, I can't hear you, so can someone give me a sign if you can hear the ambassador?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Oh,
so
good.
Great. So yeah, that sounds like pandemic, so you still are mute. So very good to hear you.
Thank you very much, Juliane, and thank you to the Women7 for the invitation. So I'm here to represent both the government of France, but also the generation equality. As you have said, $40 billion to support gender equality and women's rights in the next 5 years. It may sound a lot, but it's definitely not enough. It is, I would say, a good starting point, remembering that it had been, at the time that we held the forum last year in 2021, 26 years since we haven't had a UN World Conference on women's rights and gender equality. So, again, it's a good starting point. The objective of the forum is specifically, and building on my two predecessors, not to trigger a new international convention on women's rights or gender equality, not to have a new resolution, not to have a new declaration by leaders, but precisely to fund specific, concrete, action-oriented projects. And these funding is organized around 6 action coalitions on different topics. One is gender-based violence, another one is economic empowerment, another one yet is the intersection of gender justice and climate justice, and so on. And so we had
sadly we
companies and philanthropies to actually step in and to commit financial commitments, and to commit also through a new legislative framework for the next 5 years.
That sounds like a very good starting point. So I saw that our final guest did arrive, so I used this break to welcome Dirk Meyer on stage. He's the representative for the current G7 presidency and representing the Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. We're very happy to have you. I have to look it up because your title is very long, but very interesting. You will recognize in a second. So you're the Director General for Global Health, Employment, and now Transformation of the Economy. So I think we have the right guy. Digital Technologies, Food, Nutrition, Security. Thank you so much for taking your time and being here. And I just give you a short summary of what we already discussed, because the stories you already listened to were quite intense and very important. So we realized that the pandemic hit women and girls and marginalized groups extremely. They lost their job disproportionately more than compared to men. They had a huge loss of income during that time. And we did see that, especially on the ground, talking about women refugees and women entrepreneurs, huge cuts of funding, even though the capacity of women and women organizations organizing themselves and providing help themselves, coming them, wasn't really used. And what we see is that the recovery funds that were put together in an intense space were were just trying to fix a system we wanted to overcome. So we see that millions and trillions of dollars going into companies producing cars where mostly men are working. And we see that all the money which shall help people, employees, well, if women are less employed in the first place, it will definitely have the advantage of you receiving this money. And then, as I said, the fundings for women's organizations. Well, this is a situation. Happy you are here. We know that the G7 development ministers just met last week. We're very happy that we had a chance to speak, and we really congratulate the Minister Schulze on the feminist development policy, which is definitely something new and really revolutionary, since she herself was stressing the fact that now it shall be about transformation and inclusion and intersectionality. This is something we honestly never heard from the German ministry so far, so thank you so much for that. But I'd like to understand, since the whole situation is so complex and all those challenges are, as we said, intersecting, what is your impression? What do you think are the main challenges women, girls and marginalized groups are facing right now? And maybe some first ideas on how you act on this. So if you would take the microphone.
Is it on?
Yes, it is on.
Okay. Sorry, it's a bit a part of my hay fever, and I just was rushing on my bike from the ministry to here. I'm still a bit sweating. Thank you very much for the invitation. Actually, what we realized, and the diagnosis is exactly the same you just made, that we are not just living in time of multiple crises, but also that these crises hit women first and most heavily. And one of the really serious beginners, of course, is the COVID crisis, which is still not over. And especially coming from Ministry for Development, we really realize in all spheres that we have major setbacks in development policy, which progress we made in the last 20 years. So it's a dramatic situation. And actually, we have to mention this first when we come to what we can do next. Because the next crisis, which is ongoing at the moment, the energy crisis and the food security crisis, is actually going again in the center also of women and their lives. So when it then comes to debt crisis, which are also arising now, we're in a situation where we think that development policy has to start to rethink in many aspects. And one of the aspects is what Minister Schulze said, to develop what we call feminist development policy. I wouldn't say that it is a buzzword, but of course it means that we not just have to put the issues of women in the center of all policies, but also to think much more between the silos and do it from this point of view, which for me, coming as a person from the administration, is a real challenge. Because it sounds very easy, but we are all trained to work in our silos, not to look at the right-hand side and on the left-hand side, and to build policies in a comprehensive, holistic way with women in the center of this politics is really difficult. And therefore, we first of all have to develop this policy model on the one hand, and put it into the rebuilding aspects. And secondly, of course, strengthen all the organizations that are already in a multilateral sense on the way. Therefore, for instance, I'm very happy that it succeeded, just to mention one example, the GFF back into the financing situation, which was out, which also shows that we have to have a lot of public discussion about what the development nexus means to rebuild a resilient world, which has women in its center. So that is just one aspect. This has to continue and has to being brought back. And if I name another issue, when it comes to build resilient health systems, of course, there women have to be in the center. It's the workforce in the care jobs. That is one aspect, to bring them into formal jobs, to pay them decently, to put these groups into the possibility to get all the vaccines that are needed, to develop their skills and so on. But also when we build a resilient health structure, to see it as a One Health issue, and also look that all new instruments, for instance, when we talk about this new preparedness fund, also to try to put the aspects of women in front when we think what a resilient structure could be. That's the duty we have. It's very big, but yes, but it's necessary. And maybe one last word. When I started my job, I first went to all the multilateral organizations in Geneva to get to know them. And what I discovered there was that Canada is very much on the way with feminist development policy. But Canada needs a big partner on the side, and therefore we talked together with the minister that this will be also on the way to develop this this year, to be a good partner and bring this also in these multilateral discussions. So that's maybe for the starting point.
This is definitely a very good starting point, and just stressing the fact how working together on a global level is very important, not just for you, but for us as well. And before I just jump into the second round of questions, I just wanted to tell you as audience, please remember you can ask questions yourself. I believe it's on the right side on the screen. There you can pose your questions and vote on the questions you already see in the chat. And then in the last round, I will just take my tablet and look at your questions, and then I will give it to my dear panelist. And you can be critical as well as me. I'm going to be critical as well. So I just jump back to you, and then I go the other way around, so you have another chance to speak. We learned women organizations and companies are organizing themselves. What you just described is actually what we're asking for. As you said, put women and girls and their need in the center of economy, in the center of health services, and so on and so forth. But let's be quite concrete. We want money in the hands of women, in the hands of women-led organizations and companies. What exactly is the G7 this year doing? Or maybe if not the G7 agreed on this directly, what is the BMZ, so your ministry, the Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, directly doing for those organizations? Because this is essential recommendations coming from the W7 advisors. We're here. We want to act on ourselves. How will you engage with us?
Yeah, well, at the moment we are in the process where we are going in the next budget round, and it's just a couple of days ago we talked about that with the leading level of the BMZ, and where it is quite clear that not just 2 or 3 projects should put this feminist approach on top of the agenda, but that we have to mark every project we do together with the GIZ and with the KfW in order to rethink it in this way. So what we try to do now is to mark this in the matrix for our budget for the complete BMZ. And that also means that the strong element for the civil organizations should be marked in this respect too, and that the talks between the organizations and the BMZ should have this on top of the agenda. That's the approach, and that's what we have to bring on the road now.
Any chance you convince your G7 colleagues and come up with a joint process on this?
Most of them see it, but the difficult part is to bring it to very strong fixed quota and things like that. So.
Did I hear a yes?
Huh?
Did I hear a yes? No, hear a yes.
It is difficult.
It's difficult.
It is difficult. Yes, absolutely. Yes. I mean, as I said, Canada is part of the G7. Canada is very much on our side. But not all see that marking it also means to bring the amount of money in it.
I know.
You have to see that in the international context, Germany with a BMZ, with an independent BMZ, is also a unique situation. So
this is definitely true. What also very true is that France, even prior to their G7 presidency in 2019, pronounced their feminist diplomacy. So this was a very important step, and I think this directly led to co-hosting the Generation Equality. So, dear Ambassador, maybe you just jump in and support your G7 colleague here on what France may do to support this on the G7 level. But also, I learned that in Generation Equality, there was a subgroup working directly on putting money in the hands of women. So please, enlighten us.
Yes, exactly. And I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate our German colleagues for announcing the feminist foreign policy. As you know, we're only handful of countries around the world, not just in the G7, to have announced a feminist foreign policy. So historically, Sweden, Canada, and France in 2018, Spain, Mexico, Luxembourg, now Germany, Chile has also announced, Libya, and others may come. So there are two things we did in terms of supporting directly feminist organizations. In 2020, we have launched the Support Fund for Feminist Organizations, which is endowed with 120 million euros over 3 years. And the goal of this fund is specifically to provide funding directly to feminist grassroots organizations set in the Global South. And the governance body is shared between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the French Development Agency, l'Agence Française de Développement, and feminist organizations themselves. So it's the first step. We would hope to extend, of course, this fund and also to expand the funding that is available. But also, as you have said, Juliane, in the context of the Generation Equality Forum, one of our 6 priority areas, one of our 6 action coalitions, is specifically titled Feminist Organizations. And the goal of this action coalition is to promote, expand, enhance funding and support for feminist organizations. And in the context of the forum, the Global Alliance for Feminist Organizations was launched by the members of this coalition, namely Canada, the Netherlands, different foundations such as the Ford Foundation, Open Society Foundations, and feminist grassroots organizations like AWID and other ones. And this global alliance has its goal and its mission is really to again trigger more funding and to make more people come on board to support feminist organizations. Following on the footsteps of the Equality Fund launched by Canada a couple of years ago. So we do definitely think that getting the money in the hands of women and feminist organizations is key. And that was also part of our G7 back in 2019. That was part of the Generation Equality Forum, and that continues with the French Support Fund for Feminist Organizations.
That sounds very good. And since Dirk Meyer just briefly touched the field of healthcare and putting women and girls in the center there as well, what was the approach in the Generation Equality, or maybe just the French approach towards supporting more funding for SRHR, so sexual and reproductive health and rights, or health in general? So maybe you just can jump in on this quickly afterwards, but I would like to listen to you first, and then we'll go back to our activists.
Well, another one of our 6 action coalitions was specifically dedicated to SRHR, sexual and reproductive health and rights. And in that action coalition, France is one of the champions, together with Burkina Faso, Denmark, Argentina, the International Planned Parenthood Federation, and a number of civil society organizations. And in this context, France has announced last year at the forum new funding of 400 million euros for the next 5 years. To support access to family planning, to contraception, to increase advocacy for abortion rights, so the right to safe and medical abortion, to support comprehensive sexual education around the world, together with also UNFPA, obviously, which is the UN agency in charge of sexual and reproductive health and rights. So SRHR was one of the 6 focus of the Generation Equality Forum, and healthcare, of course, at large. We also launched on the sidelines of the forum a global coalition for a gender equal workforce in the healthcare segment. So when we talked about healthcare, of course, it's about the health of women, but it's also the presence, the leadership, and the decision-making position of women in the healthcare workforce. We have seen in the COVID that women are the majority among nurses, among midwives, but they are not the one making decisions. And at the time of the COVID, where so many decisions were in the hands of the healthcare personnel, of doctors, of scientific committees, it's also very important that we increase the percentage of women who are in these decision-making bodies at WHO and in other health organizations around the world.
Thank you so much. And I just have to echo what you just said. This is what our W7 advisors from all over the world just told us. I mean, the moment the pandemic hit us, the moment care and social infrastructure just disappeared, it was on the shoulders of mostly women and girls and other marginalized groups, to just fill in the gaps. So taking this into account and building forward fairer as the title of our panel. So if you have something concrete to add here.
Well, that's actually part of the attempts G7 put on the agenda. We just not only had the meeting of the G7 development ministers, but also a combination of the health and development ministers meeting a couple of days ago, where especially the building of very comprehensive, stable health systems was put on the agenda. Strengthen the WHO as the main organization, and setting up a new fund that will be able to finance, especially in the low and middle income countries, the structures to build a new health architecture that actually will be able to withstand the next crisis coming up, so that this crackdown of the whole system, with all these negative impacts on sexual rights, on early pregnancy, and so on, and all these major setbacks that actually hit women are prevented. And this is a momentum, actually, I think. It's a small window, because the societies in the North and in the Global South, they all still realize what this pandemic made for their societies, and especially for women. But we have to act as soon as possible. Therefore, we were happy that during the Biden summit, the US went in front to put a big sum of money on the table to build this new health architecture. But we have to go now into details. And the next meeting I will have is together with the health ministry, actually to act about that. Yep. And but that's really tough policy, where the finance ministers also have their opinion, and it's still a long way to go.
It's definitely true. It's a complex situation,
Absolutely.
and it's at the same time preventing the next challenges or crises to come, while going through the challenges we are in right now. And here I want to bring in Daria again, because what you missed, certainly since you came a little bit late, but I think you just can explain it very quickly again. Health and care infrastructure is destroyed in your country right now, and it's up to women to fill in the gaps there as well. But also, I know you're a mother of a 2-year-old child. You're living here now in Berlin, and to my belief, there is no access to kindergarten or something like this, helping you doing your important work as an entrepreneur in a network. So couldn't you give us some more concrete examples on how you work here right now, and what would really help you to do your work? Just using your chance to address the G7 directly, and the UN, and France is sitting here with us.
Basically, first of all, I am a Ukrainian, and it's my superpower. Then I am activist, and we are running like each week humanitarian initiatives in different cities in Ukraine. We send medicines from Germany also, and from other countries all over the world to Ukrainian hospitals. Some of them are on occupied areas, so it's impossible for people to reach any medicines there. I am a mother of 2 years kid, whom I was just taken during the first explosions in my native city from his own bed, which was staying on near the window. Just put them to the sofa on the central part of the room, just not to hit him if the window will be broken up because of the explosions. I'm a woman or wife of a soldier right now who was dislocated from territorial defense from western part of Ukraine to the first line on Donbass. and as other, like, for now, it's like, I don't know, thousands or thousands of women who received in the morning only like the message which consists from one sign. It's mean plus, which is means that our my husband and the father of 2 years kid is still alive there. So basically, I am also volunteer who fundraised for like the nearest weeks for our friends and husbands, ammunition, equipment, some like very expensive equipment for communication staff. Only yesterday we sent it 3 buses for evacuation people and like people who are injured in Lugansk Oblast, and like for almost 1 month my husband was in Popasna. It's like awful, like it's hell, which like with bombings all the time by Russian troops. And of course, like what are the challenges and askings? First of all, it's for the whole country, it's a full membership in European Union, because only economic, energy and trade integration to European Union will bring us security and peace. Secondly, of course, it's an opportunity to full reach G7 and European Union markets till 2030. Of course, the most important right now, it's we still are asking to close the sky to bring us the weapons, because our people sacrifice their lives. They fighting for European values, for democracy, for rule of law. And they are protecting not only our independence and the independence of our country, but basically the humanism and the future of the whole world. And we sacrifice our lives, but we are asking at least to give us weapons and close the sky, because as the example of our soldier friends who was dislocated as territorial defenders to the first line, they were only with automats before the Russian tanks and aviation. And it's like enormous number of people who were killed there and still dying every day. So, we are women entrepreneurs who saving civilians in occupied territories also. We provide food, necessities, services, and so on. We dislocate and relocate our businesses, and among 6 million of refugees who come now to European Union, it's 99% it's women and kids. So basically our like big thanks to European Union for help, but also a big asking to provide a decent job and opportunity to decent job to kindergartens and to schools for our Ukrainian kids, because only in this case Ukrainian women will be able to work and to provide the help for themselves, for their families, and for their relatives who are still in Ukraine, and for their fighters, for people who are on the first or other lines. And yes, Ukrainians are not victims, we are fighters, and basically now we are protecting the peace and democracy all over the world. So we are, of course, we are asking for help in this. We are asking to continue and maybe to more help us with medicines, with humanitarian aid, of providing some funds and support to local initiatives, because they are working on the ground, and very often they are only the one who can help the locals, the local people. Of course, it's very important to highlight what is going on, because as the colleague was mentioned, now it's a big food crisis all over the world. But we need to understand that if in 1932 it was basically a Holodomor organized by the Russians as well, and we were not able to reach this information in Europe, for example, but now we can see online how they steal millions of tons of Ukrainian grains from Kherson region and basically move it to the territory of Russian Federation, and then probably will sell it also to Europe or some other countries. So our askings, like, not be quiet, react to what you see, what's going on online, because even like some Russian soldiers online post the videos and rape even injured or newborns online. It's unbelievable, but it's true. So the world can the opportunity to reach this information and to react. So we ask like not to close their eyes, but basically to react and share what is going on. And what is also very important is, of course, we understand this is hybrid war. So this is important also to support digital initiatives of Ukraine, to support organizations who fight in propaganda and like in Europe also and in Ukraine, and basically who are fighting for the truth. So thanks for support, but also the most important, of course, it's help us with weapons and to close the skies, and then we will deal with the others by ourselves.
Well, thank you so much for highlighting the special needs you as a mother and your organization are facing. And I just want to stress this again. As you said, you need access to the markets, otherwise you can't operate. And still you need support for the ones still operating on the ground. And you just very specifically need access for your child to kindergarten. Otherwise, there's no chance to work here. And I think it's very important. So there is definitely achieving peace in Ukraine and globally. And we will hear about Syria later on. This is definitely important. But understanding that these women are fighting there and they need support, like real support, this is definitely crucial. And you just touched upon the fact that this is a hybrid setting. So the work you're doing is not just taking place on the ground. Here we have a digital setting today here as well. It's taking place virtually as well. And just yesterday we shortly discussed the fact that your work in Syria was disrupted by the government itself. So maybe you just can take us into this and then just add upon what concretely do you need for your work and what do the women do need your work with, so we just can close the first circle.
Yeah, so back in 2011, I've been like also victim of cyber attacks from the Syrian regime, and so they hacked like my email, my Facebook and Skype and everything, and this is also what we see is like with COVID, that COVID has shown us that there is no borders or limitation for crises and for pandemics, and we need like to have like a real partnership between the global South and the global North, and also to strengthen the local and the grassroots organization, and especially women on the ground, because they have the trust from local communities and also the access to the most like difficult to reach like villages and areas, and this is also what COVID has shown us. It's like we reach them to convince people about like the threat of COVID, and also to get like also vaccine, but also at the same time when there is like a monopoly on vaccines, it's like to have access to vaccines. So if people in global South, in Syria, and like in neighboring countries, refugees, including Yemen and other conflict countries, they don't have like vaccines, so we will not end up with the situation of the pandemic. Now we have like a monkeypox, like a new pandemic. So this is like how we need to see like these problems and these crises. It's like as like we need to tackle these problems together, and like meaningful participation of women and also grassroots organization is a key, is a tool, but it's not the goal. Like, because the goal is like to have a equality. And I want to also to build on what Daria said. It's and like to build on that the crisis have no borders, because like impunity in Syria with the Russia intervention, military intervention in Syria, led to the invasion in Ukraine. So if we had accountability at the time, so we will not be in this situation right now. So this is how these crises is like have links and like correlations, and like how we need to really, when there's like a crisis, to put and to use like a local grassroots and local leaders to tackle these problems, and not see it as a isolated. This is in Syria, this is in Yemen, this is in Ukraine. No, this is like the impact. It's like on all the world. Like now we are in a food insecurity situation because like Ukraine under the invasion, and like also the like a Russian invasion, and also like Syria when there's like a displacement from Syria to neighboring countries because like there is no security, there's like a bombs and from the sky and the pandemic on the ground. So we need to see like a conflicts, pandemics, and in a different way to strengthen preparedness, and also to use grassroots organization as a real partners, not as a ad hoc intervention or like ad hoc. And finally, to have a budget. So there is no change without budget. There is no policy and structural change without having real budget and good funding for like to respond to these crises.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think both of your examples showed very clearly that it's a very important step to start with announcing a feminist development policy or a feminist foreign diplomacy. So this is very important to understand that we really have to transform the way we look at the situation, and we really have to include the ones who we actually wanted to reach. It's nothing we do for them, it's something we do with them to really change the whole situation. So I assume you have something you want to react to those. And I just want to turn towards the audience just quickly. I don't have any questions yet, so I'm not quite sure this just yet another technical problem of today, or whether you are just so intensely listening that you don't have the time to write something down. So please get engaged with us, and if you have any questions, just send us them to us, but no worries, I have tons of questions myself, so giving the floor to Dirk-Marie just once again.
Yes, I mean, it's almost impossible to add something to your not just touching, but also very impressive speech about the real situation at the moment. I mean, coming from a generation who never experienced war and only heard about war when my grandpa and my granddad told, it is shocking, and it shows what is going on at the moment in the middle of Europe. What we do as the BMZ is, even before the war, the development policy was very much engaged in combination between Germany and Ukraine. This is going to continue. And with all the international organizations and partners, we are actually thinking about building funds for rebuilding. So we're looking at the time beyond. But still, the war is on, and that's the fact where we can read every day what the support is. I think what you said is very right. It's also a war about narratives. In my division, I also deal with the food security. We built this global alliance for food security, where actually the idea was also to fight this Russian narrative that the sanctions actually caused the food crisis, but it's the war that caused the crisis, and you just mentioned that too. Let me add one aspect to you, especially for countries where you have fragile or even destroyed governmental structures or autocratic structures. It's very complicated to develop development policies. And therefore, we concentrate then on the support of civil society organizations. And you just showed how important that is to strengthen the people on the ground to act beyond the very often very complicated governments. And therefore, a development ministry has to act in both directions. With a normal state, you can do it by normal consultations with the governments, but here you are actually forced to go into much more complicated situations and support the civil organizations, which we do. Yes, that's maybe the first reactions.
So, Ambassador, you're in this interesting position to be both a G7 member and speaking for a forum, a process which is located at the UN level. So do we have any more tips for the German colleague who is now having the presidency, since France really used it so uniquely to, as I said, first declaring the feminist foreign diplomacy, then hosting the G7, having engaging with the W7 there as well, and still greetings to my friends from the W7 in France. It was an intense time. And then followed up by the generation equality. So any more hints on how to support this, and maybe some ideas for joint approaches for the future, since you're both here?
Well, I don't know if I'm in a position to give advice to the German colleagues. I know they've been dealing with the subject of gender equality very seriously, and maybe a historical note that, as you might know, gender equality and women's rights has not always been a focus of the previous G7, going back a long time ago. It was I think one of the landmark moments was the first G7, the G7 in 2018, in Canada, where the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has established the Gender Equality Advisory Council, also called the GEAC, for those who are interested, which is an advisory body of 20 to 30 expert and renowned personalities for their work on gender equality. Some of them are politicians, some of them are in diplomacy, some of them are economists, some in the media, and this very diverse crowd, which role is to advise the G7 leaders and to provide them with recommendations. And so France had taken up this GEAC in 2019 when we had the presidency. And during the G7 French presidency, we had announced a number of initiatives, but among others, the Biarritz partnership also. And then it was, there was sort of a gap here when there was a US presidency of the G7, but then the GEAC was reactivated for the British presidency last year. It has also provided important recommendations to the G7 in the UK last year. And I know that the GEAC has also been, will be reactivated by the G7 presidency. So it's very important to have this independent high-level body providing advice and concrete recommendations for the G7 leaders to base their decision. And of course, it's a very specific time. We have talked a lot about COVID and the impact of COVID on women. I would like to say, and even speaking as a government's representative, it is still an uphill battle working from within the government to make sure that gender equality and women's rights are mainstreamed. And so there will be a G7 equality ministers meeting, but ideally the G7 finance ministers meeting will also tackle gender equality. Ideally, the G7 environment ministers meeting would also tackle gender equality, and so on and so on. Ideally, it would not remain siloed within the purview of gender equality ministers, which are very important. Ideally, all of the different ministers meeting, and of course the leaders meeting in June, would really tackle gender equality as not only a central problem, but also a central solution to building back, the world of tomorrow.
Thank you so much. The first question jumped in and then I destroyed it. So if someone of the technical team could help me with this, sorry so much. Even after 2 years of pandemic, I'm still not able to use a tablet easily, but there they come. And still, I want to use the opportunity because what I saw that most questions are obviously for the representative of the G7. I'm sorry, but still I want to give a chance to the other activists to not just as a final statement, but after listening to everything they just explained, what do you feel is still the most important, really, from your perspective as working on the ground with women organizations? I think you stress intensely the fact that it's so important to have funding for your work, access, And the way to operate on digital level, as we said, you need devices for this and access to this, and you need skills, you need a network of people. But is there anything else you want to add? So maybe Daria, I ask you first, and then Musna, you react, and then I get some help with digital tools here, and then we can listen to the questions from the ground.
Yes, for sure. Ukrainian women are those who are supporting, who are fighting on shoulder to shoulder with men. This is also the people who saving civilians, people who providing humanitarian aid or saving people's lives as doctors and nurses and so on. But what is very important for the whole Ukrainian families, it's to basically to wake up from this nightmare, to understand that tomorrow all native people will be near us, that we will be able to stay in our country, to develop our businesses, and basically support the development of the world. Sanctions are matters. It's very important not to support the trade with Russian Federation, because it's bloody money, it's bloody energy if you are buying it from Russian Federation, because all the money which comes, they transform to bullets and rockets. And right now, unfortunately, on the Black Sea, we have 6 ships and 2 submarines with ballistic rockets, which can easily reach any European city in a few seconds. And this is a danger, and we need to count this when we deal with Russian business. So from our Ukrainian business community, of course, we are asking to support and to lobby and advocate stopping deal with Russia and with Belarus, because we understand the close connection, and a lot of rockets now are coming also from Belarus, unfortunately. And the final statement, it's again and again, finally, please close the sky under Ukraine, and of course support Ukrainian business who are nevertheless on the situation. It's on the race. It's providing a product to European Union, G7 markets also. And we have enormous results of IT industry, because IT companies saved nearly 97% of their contracts. And 77% of companies reach new clients. So we believe in Ukrainian business, we believe in Ukrainian people, and I truly believe that I will live in the country of happy and free people.
Thank you so much. As I said, I will directly give Musna the chance to speak as well.
Yeah, so for G7 countries and also for Global North, I wanted just to put emphasis that dealing with the countries of conflict or unstabilized countries, so we need to take risk. It's I know it's governments and member states, they don't like taking risk, but dealing with this situation and when people at the risk, so we need to take risk in terms of our policies, in terms of adopting a new policy or programs, or and also to achieve a transformative change. So if we will deal and we stay with the as business as usual, so we will not reach that transformative change and structural change. So this is why to put connections between all the crises. We couldn't just tackle it as boxes isolated from itself, but we need to really see beyond each crisis, what's the potentials of the risk, and also to have a real partnership, meaningful partnership with the people on the ground and with the grassroots organizations, especially with women, because they are dealing with the really patriarchal societies, and also bombs and at the same time like health problems. So and this is usually what we hear from the international community for Syrian women, that like women are the hardest to reach. But we at the Syrian Women's Political Movement, we prepared 60 profiles of women who are ready to be in politics and also to be in negotiation for Syria, for peace negotiation. And this is also to answer this question. Women are not the hardest to reach, but the seat at the table is the hardest to reach for women. Thank you.
And I think this is the pattern we're hearing more or less for everybody. Breaking the silos. I mean, this is actually what the Agenda 2030 was all about. Yes, we have 17 goals, but we need to break the silos, otherwise we won't find any sustainable solution. And I can tell that the questions our audience have is mostly about money. I will address you for that. But also a question I want to give to the ambassador. We need to mention that the majority of the global health workforce are women. They were working at the front line of the pandemic and had higher risks to get infected. Worldwide, we will face a lack of healthcare workers. We will therefore have to improve the working conditions and wages of healthcare workers. How this issue tackles? I'm just addressing you because you were already talking about the need to invest into health and care infrastructure. And I just want to bring in here the concrete demand from the W7 to invest an additional 2% on the health and care infrastructure. This is something very concrete, and we want you to commit to this. But first of all, the ambassador, a quick answer to this one, and then we talk about money again.
Yeah, this is an issue that was raised very strongly during COVID, even though women working in the healthcare workforce knew that for decades. But let's say it came to the public's attention through the COVID because we saw so many nurses and midwives and female staff working on the ground being really the battleground soldiers of the fight against the pandemic. And on the other hand, as you were saying, and I was saying, we saw only men, on TV, in the media, giving advice on how to handle this crisis. And we saw male leaders making decisions for the rest of the population. And this was not really tackled within the Generation Equality Forum because we did not have a specific action coalition on healthcare, because we decided to have transsectoral action coalition. So on thematic, but not on specific sector. So in addition, France decided to launch this coalition together with the World Health Organization, WHO, and an NGO called Women in Global Health, which advocates for more women in health workforce, more gender equal health workforce, and more women also at the head of health organizations, whether it's in the public system or in the private system, also in pharmaceutical companies and so on and so on. And so we've had some success with the coalition together with the support of the WHO, and we ask of governments and international organizations also, such as the Global Fund Against Pandemics or Gavi, the organizations that fights for vaccines, to make sure that we support and promote women in decision-making roles and bodies, and to also enroll governments to make commitments on this. And at the national level, there was a whole reform of the healthcare sector that was launched actually before the pandemic that made even more sense during the pandemic. And one of the initiatives that was taken by the French government is to increase the wages of the nurses of the whole sector. But we know it's not enough. It's not just about wages. It's also about social recognition. It's about also their place in the whole healthcare sector. And we definitely need to invest more in healthcare, not just because there are many women working in the sector, but because it affects the whole of society.
And I think this touches upon what you just said very briefly, the connection between the ministers' meeting of the health ministries and your ministers. So there are two questions I think that are directly linked to you. The first one you touched upon. How is the G7 planning to ensure that they are not just building back better, but actually supporting a transformative economic recovery? And linked to this, I think, is what can the G7 do to ensure that there is an increase in public spending on health care services around the world? So from this perspective, and could this include more provision through aid and debt relief and an ending of IMF conditions on austerity? I know that's an easy question, but we're not afraid of easy questions, so you have the floor.
Okay. Before the war on Ukraine, I worked in the Ministry for Ecological Affairs, the BMU. And at the end of the 4 years working there, I was crystal clear that the socio-economic transformation of the economy is on the way. Because that sounds a bit surprising, but I was really clear about that. Because I realized that a strong pressure came from the financial sector. They said it's stranding assets to rebuild gas pipelines and things like that. Since war, I'm a bit more shaking because I don't know whether it is still on top of the agenda. I hope it. When I look at the German government, with for instance, the attempt to build much quicker the amount of windmills we need and renewable energies, that's a good sign. On the other hand, we are in the need to exchange the sources we got from Russia now from other parts of the world. So it's a very difficult situation, but still I see also in my ministry that all the contracts we do with the partner countries in the Global South, for instance, they combine climate activities, biodiversity activities, also with socio-economic transformations. So therefore, this is on the agenda, and therefore I think that the Green Deal, but also the rebuilding programs that are actually on the way, have that in mind. So I'm optimistic in that sense, although we have possibly a moment where this rethinking of world trade is very strong, and we all don't know how the geopolitical trade systems will be after the war. The first point. Second point, I think I touched most of that, whether we increase the money in health systems. I'm sure that there is a momentum, and we are actually trying to use this momentum. It is much cheaper to invest now in being prepared and prevent, in a holistic sense, coming up pandemics, rather than spending again that much money into immediate responses that we saw in the corona crisis. And third question, which is, I have to be cautious on this ground. I think that the age of complete wie heißt denn die Formulierung? Nicht authentic. Austerity.
Yes.
I was sorry. There was
it's
just
a tough word.
Yes,
we need
austerity.
To yeah.
That the stiff austerity policy came to an end. I mean, during the crisis, we saw also in Germany that we excluded that we stopped that. Still, it is necessary to have solid budgets, but I think. Most of the governments know that as well as the transformation, also the building up of resilient systems costs a lot of money, and that you need money for that. And therefore, the concentration only on austerity, which was a main topic for the last decades, loosened and became a bit easier than it was before. So it's a diplomatic, cautious answer. If you ask me for my personal opinion, we can do it afterwards.
I will definitely I will get back on that. But you just mentioned again the Green Deal, and the next panel coming up is focusing directly on climate change and climate justice more specifically. So I don't want to jump into this too much, but I just want to bring your attention to our lovely logo. There you see not just green, you see actually a lot of colors, and this is what we ask you to. When we talk about breaking the silos, really need to add colors to those deals. We need to accomplish rainbow deals, because it's not just nature we took for granted. It's not just nature that we took for free. It's women's unpaid or very few paid work they're doing every day. And when we're transforming the whole economy, this is the very moment we really have to understand this. So it's not just green, as you see. If you just take one picture from this summit today, just this colors, I think this is very crucial. And some of you ask us, well, these are very impressive women. Where's everybody else? Where are the women from the Global South? Well, what you can't see, they're here with me. And they wrote the recommendations you listened to just in the very first video. And just stay put, because in the next panel, there will be others as well. And we're trying to present to you as many of those 65 advisors who are working with us as possible. But maybe, Mosna, you just can agree. There are more women. It's not just us, but it's always very difficult to bring more than 60 people on one panel. I think that would be way too long. So I think we'd like to put an end to this very intense and long discussion. Thank you so much for agreeing to, well, end this complexity, or at least try to focus on some points of this very complex picture, because we started with COVID and we understood, oh, there's this digital transformation taking place as well, which is hitting women differently than men. And then we have a war coming up, and we have the security crisis, and we ended even with the climate change. So it's not so easy to discuss this one crisis, but we have to take into account the effects and how these are multiplying the effects on this individual. And that we need to make sure that the solutions we find need to have women and girls in the center, obviously. Every cent we are spending has power. So sticking to the fact that we have neutral solutions for a problem is just impossible, because every solution has consequences. And the worst case, or the best case, is actually the situation stays the same, but in times in which there is no country on the whole planet where gender equality is achieved, this is definitely not an approach we can afford. So understanding each cent has power, and then as we ended up taking the rainbow from behind of us and putting this at the heart of the solutions we need. This is, at least from my perspective, something we need to do. But I'd like to welcome on stage another W7 advisor, because we have here with us the co-chair of one of our working groups, the working group focusing on women's economic empowerment, justice and rights, Ursula Schäfer-Preuß. And what is important for you to understand, she was the first ever Director General, the female one, from the Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. So they should be some sort of colleagues, and it's good to see what's coming up next. But you are also the Vice President of UN Women here in Germany, and you are engaged in so many others, organizations and associations. I can't manage it here, but I want to give you the chance to speak from the perspective of being one of the co-chairs of this working group from the W7, and maybe at some points we missed here, but would be happy to hear from you. So, Ursula, the floor is yours.
Okay. I hope this is working. Dear friends, dear colleagues, I'm really very happy to be here with you. We had a really complex discussion, exchange of views, starting, I think, with the Agenda 2030, looking into where we will be going with this G7 summit. And our particular theme, I have to get the right theme here, building back fairer, key factors of a gender-just COVID recovery with a transformative economy. I think we went from grassroots and civil society up to the highest government level, and one can really see how important it is to have the dialogue between the civil society, the grassroots people, the people on the ground, and you really have given us very moving examples of the situation in your respective countries and how to cope with the manifold challenges. And then we have heard how the feminist foreign development, and I would say peace, global policy has to forge to get women more in the center and try to establish a more gender perspective, looking into financing and looking into funding. I think this is the gender lens that is so important. Women, men, and diversity, to get all these dimensions together. And I found it interesting what Dirk Meyer said, looking into how to transform, in a way, bilateral and multilateral cooperation and financial and technical cooperation and get the gender lens better into that. I think there is a lot to be done. We have to get there's finance available, private, public, funding, but it has to be focused. We have to get out of the famous silos. They have been there for many, many years, decades. So let us see also what has been said looking into the Gender Equality Forum. There are really good platforms to move things together and then also try and implement what we have been saying here in our communique, which will be handed over to the Chancellor tomorrow. And I think we really have to get implementing on the ground all the many recipes that are there. And so let's see how we can move on with that. Thanks to the panel, thanks to the audience, and I do hope that we can move on with our W7 agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ursula, for wrapping us this so perfectly. So, the ambassador may have left already. Still, thank you so much. Sending some greetings to New York. Thank you so much, Daria, for being here on the panel with us. Thank you so much, Musa. Thank you so much, Dirk Meyer, and lots of energy and good luck. And we're still here after our summit. So if you need someone and need some advice, just give us a call. We're definitely here to discuss. And so handing over to Carolina again.